Hey guys, and welcome. Today I'm going to do something a little unusual, which I wouldn't normally do, which is to ask you, if you're watching this video, just to pop a little emoji down in the comments so that I know that you've been here. I've had some tech issues today, and this is the fourth time I'm making this video, but I truly, deeply feel that this content, these concepts, have been so helpful to myself and my clients that I want to share them, and I'm really hoping and praying that that value will be experienced and someone will benefit from these. So I'm that committed to showing up for myself as well as you guys in getting this video done. What I'd like to talk about today is understanding triggers. So many of you will probably already be familiar with this term I'm triggered, or triggers, and what it means. So it means when we are having some kind of intense emotional reaction to something that's happened, and the thing that's happened is our trigger and we are triggered. Personally, I'm actually not a fan of this term. I don't love the association with arms, although Gabor Mate, who I've mentioned in one of these videos previously, has pointed out that in some ways that's a fairly accurate analogy, because there is a small thing, like on a weapon, the trigger is small, and then there's all these explosives that get set off, and frequently for us emotionally, the incident that occurs may be quite small and the reaction is quite big and can be quite explosive. However, I feel for many of us working with this kind of experience that that word can be a little bit pejorative, it can be a little bit negative, and it can add to the load of negative emotion or difficulty that we can have in working with these very experiences. It can add to the shame that we might experience around how our body, nervous system, and emotions are responding to the world, and how little we might feel in control of that. So it's often said that understanding your triggers is really important in healing from abuse or trauma and being more functional in your day-to-day life. And I believe this to be very true. In my observation, there is a lack of nuance in what understanding your triggers really means. And I'm going to switch. I call this process that we're about to learn trigger mapping. So understanding triggers comes from trigger mapping. But as I said, I'm not a fan of the word trigger. So I prefer the word activation, but activation map sounds kind of weird. I think trigger map sounds better, but I don't know if you've got any ideas. As if you watch this and you resonate with any of the content and you have an idea for a better name for this process, please let me know. So for now, we'll go with trigger mapping. And the reason we map is in order to better understand. The other reason that we map is what we start to find is that in that understanding, we come to know these events so well that although they're complex and nuanced, they start to simplify, because what you will see as you do this is that frequently the maps look pretty similar. With a lot of my clients, we do this over a period of time, and then they all start to really blend down to a few essential maps that represent all the others. And that's a really great place to get to in your healing, when you're that knowledgeable about what's going on with you, and it's that condensed and simplified. All that complexity has been condensed and simplified. It becomes much quicker and much easier to work with it. But we're talking here about the fairly initial stages. We know that we're having emotional issues with something. So I've heard people talk about somebody treats me in a particular way at work. There's a woman at work and she's really condescending to me and I get angry. So that's a great first level of understanding. But I would call that more awareness. So we're aware that we have the triggers and we're somewhat aware of the components of the triggers, but it's not a very deep and nuanced version of that. And I feel that the more we know about something, the more empowered we feel to attend to it and to potentially transform it, to work with it and change it. And most people who are coming to this degree of awareness are doing so because they're having a problem and they want to solve the problem to some extent. So we need to go a little bit deeper to really shift this. We need to go a little bit deeper and we need to work with the complexity of the being, which is multi-layered, emotional, physical, spiritual, all that kind of stuff. I will have a particular model that I will explain here about different components of the being that we would work with when mapping out triggers. So I'm going to talk you through that now. The first one is the body, is the physical. So some kind of reaction that's a trigger will have a certain amount of intensity to it, will be an emotionally intense reaction in the body. So the first thing frequently that we may or may not notice, this is the interesting thing, everybody's different, everybody's coming with different tools, awarenesses, and some people are not aware of what's happening in their body. And there are multitudes of reasons for that are different, again, depending on the person. If we have, how can I say that? The minute that we are directed and taught how to attend to the body, so yoga is a great practice for this, I'm a big advocate of that, and how to feel sensations in the body, we will start to realize and notice, yes, when I'm reacting like that, there's a sensation in the body. And so the first step is to turn toward that sensation and to observe it and feel it. Now, already in the first step, there may be a little stumbling block in that if you're coming from a background of abuse or trauma, then being with the body may not be a very safe experience for you. So we need in the early stages to establish sufficient safety to complete this process. One of the things that this process then goes on to do is to build a relationship with ourselves where that safety becomes automatic and inbuilt. But in the beginning, we need to just get little bits of it sufficient that we can do the full process, that we can then come back and really build deep safety into our experience of the body. So initially, if you're having an intense reaction, and I'll use this one because I think it's a big one for many people, and it's something that I am currently demonstrating how these tools can work through a very public challenge that I'm doing, a 100 open mic challenge, because being on stage is a very exposing, a very vulnerable place to be. And I've had clients say, oh, I generally feel safe, but in that context, no, I don't feel safe at all. So if we're in that situation and the intensity of the feeling that we start to tune into is overwhelming, one of the first things we can do, which is super duper duper helpful, is to normalize, is to tell ourselves in that moment, there's nothing wrong. Because we think if we're having these intense experiences and we were never validated around our intense emotions as children, we never got to have that experience of being reassured that our experience was totally normal and totally okay. The minute that you do that, I'm not going to go into all the neurobiology of this, which I've been researching lately and is, by the way, fascinating, but not necessary to understand at this stage. You will start to feel a little bit of a shift, a little bit more of a space. So rather than having that feeling and then spiraling into it and it getting worse, or you shutting down, or some kind of defensive, reactive, internal process to get away from that feeling, that sensation. Let's use the word sensation here when we're talking about the body. You let it know you're not broken, there's nothing wrong, What you're feeling is completely normal and you are safe, if you genuinely are. So the first step in mapping, go to the body. Second step, go to safety. The third step, once this is in place, you can check out what's going on in the mind and the types of thoughts you might be having. And frequently in this context, this example that I'm running with about being on stage, the thought will be some version of you're not good enough. Oh, I didn't talk about the sensation. For me personally, the sensation will often be this nauseating feeling and this kind of sinking, pressured feeling in the solar plexus. The thought will be some version of you're not good enough, you didn't practice enough, you messed up, whatever it is. The fourth step is to go to your heart, is to recognize what the feeling state is. So we've looked at the sensation, we've looked at the thought, we look at the feeling. And when I began this work, I thought that I was already really good at this, but I really wasn't. So that was a humbling lesson and a good lesson for those of us that have done a lot of work, that we may not have found the right thing for us yet. Or we may be coming across a new way of working that's giving us depth and access to something that we weren't able to do before. And this is to really quickly name a feeling. My coach calls it emotional literacy. And I've now become quite quick at it. But in the beginning, it can be a little bit of a laborious process. And there are these things you can find on the internet, emotional color wheels that have a lot of emotional words on there that you can start to play with in this process of beginning to map out your triggers and also to map out your feelings. So you name the feeling, and in the case of feeling exposed, raw and vulnerable on stage and in a performance context, the feeling is frequently shame. Particularly, I know for myself, those sensations that I described would go with the feeling of shame. The fifth step is to go to your needs. And frequently, this is what mapping and understanding our triggers takes us to, is some kind of unmet need, unattended need that's inside of us. And when we know what they are, and as I said earlier, when you begin to map it out and you see the same maps coming over and over again, you know what your needs are and you can actually attend to them proactively. So, in the case of being on stage, the need there frequently, again, actually is, I don't feel secure, I don't feel safe. So how might I get security and safety for myself in that moment? And for me in this process, that's a lot of somatic tools, a lot of grounding that I will do. It might be having a friendly face in the audience. Again, you'll be different. Everybody's different. Once we know, once we have mapped and explored and understood in fine detail and nuance our trigger maps, we are then equipped to proactively set ourselves up for more successes in situations that may have traditionally been incredibly triggering or challenging. So this is the way that understanding at a deeper level, mapping and understanding at a deeper level, the nuances and details that belong to you will empower you to take proactive action in your life to do the things that you need to step forward, step up, step out, take action in maybe areas where you couldn't before, and make changes to be more fulfilled, more productive, whatever it is that you're looking for. I hope this has been helpful. My phone is beeping at me, so I'm going to end things now. If this resonated with you, please do drop me a heart in the comment. I'd love to connect more with you around these things. Ciao, ciao.